Hi, everyone. It's Mike Todd from Transform Philanthropy. And today I wanted to talk just a little bit about what I actually do. I get that question a lot. The reality is that I consult in strategic philanthropy. And that really means I spend a lot of time talking about donor advised funds. I work with charities. I work with wealth advisors. And on occasion, I work with donors, but that's a smaller part of what I do. Today, I would like to share with you what I do with charities when I consult with them. And it's largely centered around the donor advised fund. And I split it into three phases. And phase one is purely reactive, it's very passive, and it's what does your organization do when you get an unsolicited donor advised fund grant in the door? You didn't ask for it, you weren't expecting it, but you likely last year got four or five or one or 10, whatever the number is. You probably did get a couple of donor advised funds and we're not exactly sure how to deal with it, how to process it, how to book it in, etc. So phase one is just dealing with that. And it's setting up a passive strategy so that everybody knows what happens when a donor advised fund grant comes in. Questions like, does everybody even know what a DAF is? And do they understand the processes behind it? Does the fundraising team ever get notified if it's finance who receives the grant, cashes the check? Does fundraising ever find out about it? How is the grant supposed to be coded in your CRM or your DRM, your donor relationship management tool? How does it appear? How do you track it? Do you know who the donor is, and are they in your system as well? Does everyone understand that there's an actual donor behind the grant? Sometimes I speak with charities and they don't really understand that there was a person behind it. You may or may not have too much information on them, but there's definitely a donor behind that. And we want to understand that and make sure that it is viewed accordingly. Do we have a process in place to identify that donor? So maybe we have a name, maybe we have a fund name, and maybe it's anonymous. And those are pretty much the three options. Often it'll come in and at first glance, you won't be able to see anything. And you'll think, it's not one of those anonymous donor advised fund grants I always hear about. That may not be true. So never take anonymity as the first answer. And there's things that we can do to probe a little bit and see if we can identify that donor. Finally, do we have a process in place to steward that donor when we do wring out every bit of information that's available? And it might not be a lot, but we still want to steward that donor. Do we know who to acknowledge the gift to, who to thank if we don't have full donor information? So these are all very important points that can be relatively easily covered off. Keep in mind, this is still a passive approach. We're not talking about going out and looking for more, but on those few that come in regardless, you want to make sure that you're capturing everything possible on the data that comes with that grant. So phase one, passive approach, very, very important, and it's where we would always start. Phase two comes along when you get a few of these and you realize, hey, this is interesting. I'm starting to understand this a little bit. We would like more. That would be great. So phase two is making your organization what I like to call DAF attractive. And by that, do you communicate to people who come across your website, who come across your collateral, that you actually know what a donor advised fund is? And that sounds kind of strange, but I'll tell you, I've had several conversations with different donors who have expressed a disappointment or confusion because they love an organization, but they don't see the words donor advised funds anywhere, not on the website, not in the collateral, and not even in the conversations that they have with their fundraiser. And it can be kind of perplexing. One of my favorite things to talk about is your ways to give page. And many charities actually call it that. And there you see listed credit card, securities, legacy, etc. And the interesting point now is that if donor advised fund does not appear on your ways to give page, some people look at that and they assume that it's not a way to give to your organization, which I first found kind of confusing. And I said, well, why would you think that? Well, I don't see the words anywhere. So phase two is make your organization appear DAF attractive. There are things that we can do to that, to bring more DAF grants your way. That leads us to phase 3, which is very simply educate your existing donors. And here's the thing, this requires some trust. This requires a good level of understanding from everybody in your organization, what the DAF is and why it makes sense that we would want more. And along the road, I would have shared with you data on how when people switch to a donor advised fund, and it's fascinating, but when they switch to a DAF, their giving generally goes up. And I've seen reports that say it doubles in effect. But just trust me when I say that people's giving goes up when they switch to a donor advised fund. So now it's phase 3, and we say, listen, we want more donor advised fund grants. We understand how they work. We understand the benefits, the many benefits for the donor. We understand for us, it's simply a different form of payment, but it is a form of payment that people are more generous with. So we'd like to talk to our existing donors who are not using a DAF and share with them this information and encourage them that they should take a look at switching their giving to using a donor advised fund. It's better for them. Frankly, it's better for us, but not just us, for the other organizations that they're supporting as well. Phase 3, educate your donors. It takes us right through the donor advised fund journey till we come out the other end, and we're maximizing the revenue that we're going to receive from donor advised funds. And we have given, quite frankly, our donors the gift of knowledge, and we're helping them become more effective and more efficient donors. That's what I do. If you want to talk specifically about your own organization, your DAF strategy, or your needs, please reach out. I'd be happy to do that. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.